March 6, 1945, 3:17 in the afternoon, Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany. A German Panther commander presses his eye against the periscope of a tank that has killed more American armor than he can count. Through the cracked optics, he sees an American vehicle rolling into the plaza. Not a Sherman. The hull sits lower. The gun is longer, thicker. Something is wrong. He has 15 seconds to figure out what he is looking at. He will not use them well. To understand how that German commander ended up staring down a gun he could not identify, we have to go back 3 months. To a road in Belgium in the snow at 2 in the morning, December 19, 1944, the Ardennes forest. 2 o'clock in the morning. A 27-year-old lieutenant named Belton Y. Cooper stands in 6 inches of dirty snow, watching his recovery crew winch a Sherman tank onto a flatbed trailer. The tank has no crew. The tank has no turret roof. Where the roof used to be, there is a jagged black hole the size of a dinner plate, and inside the hull, everything that was once organic is now carbon. Cooper does not look inside. He has stopped looking inside. He is the Ordnance Liaison Officer for the 3rd Armoured Division, and this is the 4th Sherman his men have recovered tonight, and the night is not over. The temperature is 7 degrees Fahrenheit. His feet stopped feeling anything 3 hours ago. Somewhere to the east, artillery rumbles like a train that never arrives. Cooper takes off his glove, wipes his nose with the back of his hand, and writes in a small green notebook, 4 Shermans, Company B. Panther round. Frontal armor. Crew's total loss. He closes the notebook. He does not write what he is thinking. What he is thinking is this. Back home, in an office in Washington, there is a general who could have stopped this. There is a tank the Americans could be driving right now tonight. That would not burn like this. There is a gun that has existed for 18 months. And nobody is using it. The gun is a 90mm cannon. And the story of why it took so long to reach the front line is not a story about German cleverness. It is a story about American men fighting American men, in offices 5,000 miles from the snow. To understand how 20 American tank crews ended up dying in machines they knew were inadequate, we have to go back to 1942, back to a decision made in an air-conditioned room in Washington by a man who never rode in a tank in combat. His name was Lieutenant General Lesley J. McNair. He commanded Army Ground Forces, which meant he decided what weapons the American soldier carried into battle. McNair was 60 years old, a West Point man, an artilleryman by training. He was intelligent, hard-working, and completely wrong about the future of armored warfare. McNair believed in a doctrine called tank-destroyer separation. The idea was elegant on paper. Tanks would not fight tanks. Tanks would exploit breakthroughs. Enemy tanks would be handled by lightly armored, high-velocity vehicles called tank destroyers, machines like the M10 and later the M18 Hellcat. According to this doctrine, the American tank did not need a big gun, because the American tank was not supposed to shoot at German tanks. That was somebody else's job. The doctrine had one flaw. It was not true. In North Africa in 1943, and in Sicily, and in Italy, and eventually in Normandy, American tank crews discovered that German tank crews had not read the American doctrine. German tanks shot at American tanks all the time, and American tanks, with their short 75mm guns and their tall, thin-skinned hulls, burned. They burned so consistently that British troops nicknamed the Sherman the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter. The advertising slogan for Ronson lighters was, "Lights every time." Belton Cooper, in his memoir published 53 years later, would title his book Death Traps. Now here is the first twist in our story, and it is a strange one. The Americans already had the weapon they needed. They had it before they needed it. In 1940, before the United States was even in the war, the Army had adopted a new heavy anti-aircraft gun. It was called the 90mm M1. It was designed to shoot down high-altitude bombers. It was accurate, it was powerful, and it fired a 24-pound armor-piercing shell at nearly 2,700 feet per second. That shell could punch through nearly 5 inches of hardened steel plate at 500 yards. In 1943, engineers at the Aberdeen Proving Ground took that anti-aircraft gun, modified it for tank use, and designated the new weapon the 90mm M3. They fitted it to a prototype tank chassis called the T-26. They tested it. It worked. It could kill a Tiger from the front at combat range on the first shot. The prototype was ready in the fall of 1943. The tank did not enter combat until February of 1945. 15 months. 15 months in which American tank crews continued to die in Shermans against German armour they could not penetrate. 15 months in which the weapon that would save them sat in a proving ground in Maryland, being tested, being refined, being blocked by General McNair. McNair looked at the T-26 and saw a tank that violated his doctrine. It was too heavy. It was too slow, in his opinion. It carried a gun designed to fight other tanks, which was not what American tanks were supposed to do. He recommended that the project be limited to a small experimental batch. He recommended that Sherman production continue as the primary armoured effort. He was, at that moment, the single most important man standing between the American tank crews in Europe and the weapon that could keep them alive. He was also, by the summer of 1944, running out of time. The second twist arrives now, and it is one of the cruel ironies of the Second World War. July 25, 1944, Normandy, Operation Cobra. General McNair had come to France to observe the massive American breakout offensive. He wanted to see his doctrine at work. He stood in a forward observation area near the town of Saint-Lô, wearing his 3 stars, watching the sky. American bombers came in overhead. More than 1,500 of them. They were supposed to obliterate a rectangle of German positions in front of the American line. The plan called for the bombers to fly parallel to the front line. Instead, they flew perpendicular. Instead, the bombs drifted short. Instead, they fell on the American observation positions. Lesley McNair was killed instantly by an American bomb. He was the highest-ranking American soldier killed in Europe during the Second World War. Killed not by the Germans he had spent 30 years preparing to fight, but by the Army Air Forces he had never fully trusted. The doctrine he had built survived him. His replacements did not immediately reverse his decisions. The T-26 remained a limited production experiment. The Shermans kept burning. For 5 more months, Belton Cooper kept driving out at night to winch dead men out of dead machines. Then, in December of 1944, something changed, and the change came from a man most Americans have never heard of. His name was Brigadier General Gladeon M. Barnes. He was 56 years old, a career ordnance officer, and he was the Chief of Research and Development for Army Ordnance. Barnes had watched the McNair Doctrine kill American tank crews for 2 years. He had lost the political fight in 1943. He had lost it again in 1944. And now, with McNair dead and the Ardennes offensive burning through American armour at an unsustainable rate, Barnes made a decision that was, technically, outside his authority. He was going to send the Pershing to Europe, not as an experiment, as a combat vehicle, in enough numbers to fight. And he was going to fly to Antwerp personally to make sure the tanks arrived, the crews were trained, and the tanks entered combat before anyone in Washington could stop him. The mission had a code name, Zebra Mission, 20 tanks. 20 tanks against an entire German armoured force that had been killing Shermans for 3 years. 20 tanks arriving in the middle of the coldest European winter in decades, crewed by men who had trained for less than 3 weeks, carrying a gun that had never been fired in combat. Barnes was gambling. He knew it. He wrote in a memorandum that these first 20 tanks would either prove the concept or bury it. If they failed, the Pershing program would be quietly shelved. American tank crews would fight the rest of the war in Shermans, whatever remained of it. If they succeeded, the German assumption of tank superiority, an assumption that had held since 1942, would break. On January 15, 1945, in the port of New York, under floodlights and armed guard, the first 20 Pershings were loaded onto transport ships. They were wrapped in waterproof canvas. Their shipping manifests listed them as heavy maintenance equipment. The crews walked up the gangways in ordinary field uniforms, carrying ordinary duffel bags, and were assigned to bunks below deck alongside infantry replacements. None of them, officially, existed. 11 days at sea, 11 days through submarine-infested water, 11 days in which 20 American tank commanders lay in narrow bunks and studied silhouette charts of tigers and panthers by flashlight, memorizing the shape of the enemies they had been sent to kill. They arrived at Antwerp on January 26th. A cold, grey, drizzling morning. The dock workers who unloaded them did not know what they were unloading. The tanks were transported by rail, at night under tarpaulins, to a maintenance yard near Düren, Germany, where Major General Maurice Rose, commander of the 3rd Armoured Division, was waiting for them. Rose was 45 years old. He was the son of a Denver rabbi. He was, at that moment, by consensus among the men who served under him, the most aggressive division commander in the United States Army. He led from the front. He rode in a jeep at the head of his columns. He had been wounded twice already. He was, in the private opinion of General Barnes, the one American commander who would actually use the Pershings the way they needed to be used. Rose walked around the first tank on the flat car. He climbed onto the deck. He looked down the barrel of the 90mm gun, sighting along it toward the eastern horizon, toward Cologne, toward the Rhine, toward everything that still stood between his division and the end of the war. He said one sentence. His aide wrote it down. This will do. It was the last week of February 1945. In Washington, General Barnes waited for the reports. In the Ardennes, Belton Cooper waited for the recovery calls. In the freezing farmland east of Ardennes, 20 American tank crews checked their ammunition and warmed their engines and waited for the order to move. None of them knew what was coming. The next 8 weeks would answer the question that Barnes and Cooper and Rose and every dead Sherman crewman in the fields of France had been asking for 2.5 years. Could the American 90mm gun kill a German Tiger? The answer arrived on the morning of February 25th, and the answer was not simple. February 25th, 1945. The banks of the Roer River, Western Germany, 6:47 in the morning. The sky is the colour of wet iron. A low fog hangs over the fields, thick enough that a man standing at the edge of the tree line cannot see the far bank 200 yards away. It is 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything drips. The engineers have been working since midnight, sliding pontoon sections into the freezing black water, and by the time the first American tank grinds forward onto the Treadway Bridge, the wooden planks are already slick with mud and diesel and mist. The tank is a Pershing. It belongs to the 9th Armoured Division, Task Force Lovelady. The crew inside is silent. They have not slept in 26 hours. The commander has his hatch cracked 6 inches, breathing through his mouth to keep the diesel fumes down, watching the road ahead through the fog. His gunner sits behind the 90mm breech with a round already loaded, safety off. His loader has a second round in his hands. Nobody has said a word since they crossed the start line. They are the first Pershings in history to move toward combat. The bridge holds. The tank crosses. Behind it, a second Pershing follows, then a third, then a company of Shermans, then infantry, then trucks, and by 9 in the morning the entire 9th Armoured Division is pouring across the Roer in a slow grey flood of steel that the German defenders on the east bank cannot stop. There are only a handful of German tanks left in the sector. Most of what remains of the Wehrmacht in this region is a thin skin of infantry with Panzerfausts, and even that skin tears within hours. The first Pershing engagement of the war is almost anticlimactic. Somewhere east of the river, in a landscape of shattered barns and frozen sugar beet fields, a 9th Armoured Pershing takes its first shot at a moving target. A German self-propelled gun, 1 round. The target burns, the Pershing crew reloads and keeps moving. No American casualties, no dramatic photograph, no newspaper story. The gun works, the tank works. The doctrine quietly has changed, but the real test is coming. And it is coming exactly 24 hours later. And it will not be quiet. February 26th. Elsdorf, Germany. A small farming village on the road between Aachen and Cologne. The 3rd Armoured Division has been fighting here for 3 days. The village is half rubble. The streets are choked with brick dust and horse manure and dead German cattle. Somewhere in the town, entrenched behind stone walls, is a battle group from the 9th Panzer Division, supported by Tiger Ones from Schwer Panzerabteilung 301, an independent heavy tank battalion. The Tigers have been killing Shermans all week. At 2 in the afternoon, Sergeant Nicholas Mashlonik of the 33rd Armoured Regiment receives a radio call. A Tiger has been spotted at the edge of the village, dug into a hull-down position behind a low earthen embankment. 2 Panzer IVs are supporting it. 3 Shermans have already tried to advance up the road. 2 of the Shermans are burning. Mashlonik is commanding one of the 12 Pershings assigned to the 3rd Armoured Division. His tank has never fired its gun in combat. Neither has he. He gives the order to move. His Pershing rolls forward through the ruins, engine growling, tracks throwing chunks of frozen mud onto the shop fronts on either side of the road. He does not go up the main street. He circles. He uses a farm lane, cuts through an orchard, comes at the German position from a flank the Germans are not watching. The Tiger crew is looking east. Mashlonik is coming from the north. He stops the tank behind a farmhouse. He climbs out of the hatch, walks to the corner of the building, looks around it with binoculars. He sees the Tiger. He sees the 2 Panzer IVs. He measures the distance in his head, 900 yards. He walks back to his tank, climbs in, closes the hatch. He tells his gunner what he sees. He tells his driver where to stop. He tells his loader which round to load first. The Pershing rolls into the open. The first 90mm round hits the Tiger on the side of the turret and passes through it. The Tiger does not burn immediately. It shudders, exhales a white puff of smoke from its ventilation ports, and the hatches begin to open. The second round is already leaving Mashlonik's gun. It strikes the first Panzer IV in the front hull. The Panzer IV explodes. The third round kills the second Panzer IV in the same way. 3 shots, 3 kills. 90 seconds. When the after-action report is written that night, the officer who writes it does not use the word miraculous, because the United States Army does not put that word in reports. But the men who read the report understand what it means. The 90mm gun works. It works at 900 yards. It works against a Tiger. It works. For a few hours on the evening of February 26th, the 3rd Armoured Division allows itself to believe that the 18 months of dead Shermans might be over. Then, a few kilometers away, still on the same day, a 2nd Pershing engages the enemy at Elsdorf. Its name is painted in white letters on the side of the turret. Fireball. Fireball is commanded by a young lieutenant. His crew is confident. They have heard on the radio net about Mashlonik's kills. They know what their gun can do. They are moving down a road at dusk, silhouetted against a burning building behind them, when a Tiger I, in a concealed position, 200 yards ahead, fires 3 rounds in rapid succession. The first round strikes Fireball on the gun barrel and glances off, shearing the muzzle brake away. The second round enters the coaxial machine gun mount and detonates inside the turret. The third round finishes what the second one started. The gunner and the bow gunner are killed instantly. The commander is thrown clear of the tank as it starts to burn. The rest of the crew scrambles out through the emergency hatches, and they lie in the ditch beside the road watching their Pershing burn. Fireball does not burn to destruction. The fire is contained. In the days that follow, an ordnance recovery team from Belton Cooper's maintenance battalion will tow the tank back to the yard, where mechanics working around the clock will repair it, install a new gun tube, and return it to combat. But nothing will bring the 2 dead men back. 24 hours. In 24 hours, the Pershing has proven itself capable of killing a Tiger from a flank and capable of dying to a Tiger from ambush. Both facts are now inside the after-action reports. Both facts are now inside the men. The myth of invulnerability, which had lasted less than 1 day, is over. For the next 7 days, the 3rd Armoured Division fights its way east toward the Rhine. It is street fighting, hedgerow fighting, exhausted men clearing houses room by room in villages nobody in America has ever heard of. Bergheim, Blatzheim, Grefrath. The Pershings move with the Shermans, 1 heavy tank per column, and their presence changes the arithmetic in ways that do not show up in the daily reports. German anti-tank crews who would have engaged a column of pure Shermans hesitate now, because they cannot tell which tank in the column has the 90mm gun until it fires. The hesitation costs them targets. The hesitation costs them time. The hesitation, more than anything, costs them nerve. And then, on the morning of March 6th, the 3rd Armoured Division rolls into Cologne. Cologne is the 4th largest city in Germany, or it was. On this morning in this year, it is a landscape of collapsed apartment blocks and burned churches and streets so choked with rubble that tanks have to detour around entire city blocks that no longer exist. 90% of the city centre has been destroyed by strategic bombing. What is left standing, defiant and impossible, is the great Gothic cathedral, its twin spires rising more than 500 feet into a colourless sky, untouched at its heart by 262 Allied air raids. Around the cathedral, in the plaza that has become a moonscape of debris, the last German defenders of the city are waiting. Among them, hull down behind a wall of rubble 2 blocks west of the cathedral, is a Panther tank of the Feldherrnhalle Panzer Force. The Panther's crew has been in the plaza since dawn. They have watched an American column enter the far end of the street. They have picked their target. The target is an M4 Sherman, commanded by Technician 4th Grade Karl Kellner, of the 3rd Armoured Division. Kellner's Sherman rounds the corner of the Hohenzollernring at approximately 3:14 in the afternoon. It is moving at maybe 8 miles per hour. Kellner is sitting in the commander's hatch, exposed from the chest up, scanning the buildings ahead. He does not see the Panther. Nobody in the crew sees the Panther. The Panther fires from about 300 feet away, and the 75mm round hits the front of Kellner's Sherman and enters the hull. The Sherman brews up. That is the phrase American tank crews use for what happens to a Sherman when the ammunition ignites. It brews up. The turret separates from the hull. Karl Kellner is killed. 2 other crewmen are killed. The men who survive drag themselves out of the burning tank and lie in the street, and one of them is on fire, and the others are trying to smother the flames with their coats. A Signal Corps cameraman named Sergeant Jim Bates has just come around the same corner, 30 seconds behind the Sherman, carrying a 35mm motion picture camera. He does not film the Sherman as it burns. He turns away. Nobody who has watched what he watched wants to film a burning tank crew. He films what happens next. What happens next is that a Pershing, code-named Eagle 7, commanded by Technical Sergeant Robert Early, with a 21-year-old gunner named Corporal Clarence Smoyer sitting behind the 90mm breech, rolls into the plaza to hunt the Panther that has just killed Karl Kellner. Bates films Eagle 7 from about 100 feet away. His camera is running. His hands are steady. He captures, in fewer than 60 seconds of black and white 16 frame per second motion picture film, the most famous tank duel of the Second World War. Eagle 7 emerges from cover. The Panther, 300 feet away, is starting to reverse. The Panther's gunner is traversing left, trying to bring his cannon onto the Pershing. He is too slow. Smoyer has already found him in the gun sight. Smoyer fires. The first 90mm round enters the Panther between the driver's hatch and the turret ring. Smoke pours out. Smoyer fires again. The second round enters the turret. The Panther's ammunition begins to cook off. Smoyer fires a third time, though the tank is already dying because he does not know it is already dying because his hands are moving faster than his mind. 3 rounds in 12 seconds. The Panther is dead. 2 of the Panther's 5 crewmen escape the burning turret. 3 do not. Jim Bates keeps his camera running. He films the Panther burning. He films the smoke rising toward the cathedral spires. He films Eagle 7, stopped in the middle of the plaza, its 90mm gun still pointed at the corpse of the tank it has just killed. The film reaches America within weeks. It plays in movie theaters. It plays in newsreels. It plays for the next 80 years in documentaries and history programs and YouTube videos, and it becomes the single most famous image of American armor in the entire war. But the film does not show Karl Kellner. The film does not show the Sherman that burned 30 seconds earlier. The film does not show the 3 American tank crewmen who died, so that the Panther could be caught in the plaza with a Pershing bearing down on it. Every generation of viewers watches the second half of the story and does not know that there was a first half. By the second week of March, reports of the new American tank are reaching the German High Command. The reports are confused. Frontline crews describe an American vehicle with a gun visibly longer than a Sherman's, with sloped armor that deflects 75mm rounds, with a range that reaches beyond 1,500 yards. The Germans do not have a name for what they are fighting. In one intelligence summary, produced by the Panzer Fifth Army staff and circulated in mid-March, the new American tank is designated Sherman Mitte Langem Rohr, Sherman with a long tube. For the remaining 8 weeks of the war in Europe, this is what the Germans will call it. They cannot classify it. It does not fit their recognition charts. They have no counter-doctrine. Every American armored column now contains a machine they cannot identify at range, and cannot always penetrate at close range, and the not knowing does something to the Panzerwaffe that overwhelming numbers of Shermans never did. The not knowing paralyzes. Tiger crews who had spent 2 years engaging Allied armor at 1,500 yards now hesitate to fire at all, because they cannot tell which vehicle in the American column is the long tube tank until the long tube tank fires first. And if the long tube tank fires first, the Tiger does not survive to fire second. By the last week of March, entire Panther companies are declining to engage. Whole panzer battalions are pulling back at the first sight of American armor on the horizon. There are still, at this moment, only 20 operational Pershings in all of Western Europe. 20 tanks. Against an army group. And on a farm road east of Paderborn, on the afternoon of March 30th, the man who had brought those 20 tanks to the front line, the man who had commanded the division that would carry them across the Rhine, was about to run out of road. March 30th, 1945, a dirt road outside the village of Hamborn, in the wooded country east of Paderborn, 8 o'clock at night. Major General Maurice Rose is riding in a jeep at the head of a column of his own division. This is how he has always led. Not from a command post 10 miles behind the line, not from a map table with a coffee cup. From the front, in an open jeep with a driver and an aide and a radio operator, close enough to the fighting that he can smell the burning fuel of the German vehicles his tanks have killed that afternoon. The 3rd Armoured Division has advanced 90 miles in 3 days. It is one of the fastest sustained armoured advances in American military history. Rose has pushed his men and machines to the edge of collapse because he believes, correctly, that the war is almost over, and every hour that ends the war sooner is an hour of American boys who come home instead of stay. The road ahead is dark. His column has become separated. Somewhere between his jeep and the main body of the division, a small group of German tanks and half-tracks belonging to the SS Panzer Replacement Brigade Westphalen has moved onto the same road, in the opposite direction, in the dark, without either side knowing the other is there. At the head of Rose's jeep, 3 American light tanks round a bend and come face to face with a German Tiger I. The Tiger's commander opens fire immediately. The 3 American tanks are destroyed in seconds. Rose's jeep swerves off the road into a shallow ditch. The Tiger keeps rolling forward, tracks grinding through the mud, and its commander leans out of the turret hatch with a machine pistol in his hand, motioning for the Americans in the ditch to raise their hands. Rose stands up. He raises his hands. He is unarmed except for a service pistol in a shoulder holster beneath his coat. He is trying, in the dark, to unbuckle the holster and let the pistol fall to the ground, to comply with what the German is demanding. The German cannot see what Rose is doing. He sees a hand moving toward what looks like a weapon. He fires his machine pistol at point-blank range. Maurice Rose is hit 14 times. He is dead before his body reaches the ground. He is 45 years old. He is the son of a Polish-born rabbi who emigrated to Denver. He is the only Jewish general to command an American armored division in the Second World War. He is the highest-ranking American killed by enemy action in the European theatre. And he has been dead for 38 days before Germany surrenders, in a war that everyone on both sides knows is already over. He does not live to see the Roer pocket collapse. He does not live to see 300,000 German soldiers walk out of that pocket with their hands on their heads. He does not live to see the Pershing complete the mission he had staked his division on. His body is recovered later that night. His division continues east without him. In the first week of April, the 3rd Armoured Division links up with the 9th Army near Lippstadt and seals the Ruhr pocket. Inside the pocket are more than 300,000 German soldiers and what remains of the industrial heart of the Third Reich. In the days that follow, entire panzer battalions surrender without firing a shot. Tank crews park their Tigers and Panthers in orderly rows in village squares, climb down, walk to the nearest American column and put down their weapons. Among the equipment surrendered are dozens of operational German heavy tanks. Their crews had chosen not to fight. Interrogations later reveal a pattern that Belton Cooper and the rest of the 3rd Armoured had already begun to notice on the road east. German tank crews were no longer sure what they were facing. The uncertainty had done more damage than the Pershing itself. There were, at that moment, still only about 20 Pershings actively engaged in combat across the entire Western Front. 20 tanks, against the collapse of an army. But not all of the 20 were standard Pershings. One of them was different. Only one. And it was on the road to a place called Dessau. The tank was a T-26E4. It was a prototype. It had been built by hand at the Detroit Arsenal from a single Pershing hull, fitted with a longer, more powerful gun called the T-15E1, and shipped to Europe as an experiment. American mechanics in the field had welded slabs of extra armour onto the front of the hull and the mantlet, using metal cut from a captured Panther. The result was a machine that looked crude and half-finished, hunched and lopsided, but on paper it could kill anything the Germans had ever built, including the 68-ton King Tiger. Only one T-26E4 reached combat in Europe. It was assigned to Company F of the 33rd Armoured Regiment, Its gunner was a 19-year-old corporal from Pennsylvania named John P. Irwin. Irwin would later write a quiet, unheroic memoir titled Another River, Another Town. It is one of the most honest accounts of tank combat ever published by an American veteran. In it, Irwin describes the last real engagement of his war, Dessau, April 21, 1945, a wide, straight street with tall buildings on either side. At the far end of the street, 600 yards away, a German heavy tank was pulling out of a side road to fire on the American column. Irwin fired first. The T-15E1 gun spoke once. The German tank stopped moving. Its crew climbed out and ran. Belton Cooper, writing his memoir 53 years later, would identify that German tank as a King Tiger. He would call it the only King Tiger killed in combat by an American Pershing. But modern historians, working from surrender records and unit rosters, and the after-action reports of the German units known to have been at Dessau, have questioned that identification. The historian Stephen Zaloga and the tank researcher R.P. Honeycutt have both suggested that the vehicle Irwin killed was more likely a Panther, or possibly a Jagdpanther, misidentified in the confusion of street combat and the fog of memory. We will not settle that dispute here. We cannot. The truth is that in the last 3 weeks of the war in Europe, an American T-26E4 Super Pershing killed a German heavy-armoured vehicle at long range in the streets of Dessau, and neither the American gunner nor the men who wrote about him decades later were lying about what they saw. They were telling the truth as they remembered it. The past is often like that. What we can say for certain is this. By the time John Irwin fired that shot, 310 Pershings had reached Europe. Only about 20 of them had ever fired their guns in combat. The war ended 16 days later, 310 tanks, 20 in combat. 8 weeks from first blood to victory in Europe. In the arithmetic of the Second World War, this is nothing. In the psychology of the Second World War, it was everything. Because the Germans who surrendered in the Roer pocket, and the Germans who surrendered at Nuremberg, and the Germans who surrendered on the roads leading east to the Elbe, had begun to believe something that no American propaganda broadcast had ever managed to make them believe. They had begun to believe that the Americans could match them, not in numbers. They had always known the Americans had numbers, in quality, in steel, in the thing that German engineering had promised to protect them from and had failed, and then, after the war, the Pershing disappeared. In November of 1945, the United States Army reclassified the M26 from a heavy tank to a medium tank. The reasoning was that the Pershing weighed less than the newer tank designs already in development, and its armour and gun no longer qualified it as heavy by the new standard. Overnight, the tank that had been designed to kill tigers became, on paper, a machine of ordinary capabilities. It was quietly retired from many active units. It was stored in depots. It was forgotten until June of 1950. Until the North Korean People's Army rolled across the 38th parallel behind more than 150 Soviet-built T-34-85s, and the American Army, scrambling to find any tank in the Pacific that could stop them, pulled the Pershings out of storage in Japan and shipped them to Korea. The Pershing fought again. It fought T-34s in the streets of Taegu and on the ridges above the Pusan perimeter. It performed well. It killed the Soviet tanks it faced. It never, in Korea, faced a Tiger. It never, anywhere in its combat career, killed more than a handful of the German heavy tanks it had been designed and built and shipped and crewed to destroy. The weapon that had been created to kill Tigers never had enough Tigers left to kill. Which brings us to the last part of this story, the part that is not about tanks at all. September 18, 2019, Washington, D.C., the National World War II Memorial. An old man is standing in a wheelchair beside the fountain. He is 96 years old. He is wearing a dark suit and a small ribbon on his lapel. His hands, which once held the traversing wheel of a 90mm tank gun in the shadow of Cologne Cathedral, are folded in his lap and are trembling slightly, the way old hands tremble. His name is Clarence Smoyer. He has come to Washington to receive a Bronze Star Medal for his service in the Second World War. The medal is being awarded to him 74 years after the events for which it is being awarded. His crewmates from Eagle 7 are all dead. Bob Early is dead. Homer Davis is dead. John DeRiggi is dead. Clarence Smoyer of Laheyton, Pennsylvania, is the last man alive from the crew that killed the Panther in the plaza. The medal is pinned to his lapel by a general who was not born when Smoyer fought. The general reads a citation. There is a small crowd. Smoyer's family is there. A journalist named Adam Makos, who has written a book about the crew, is there. But the ceremony in Washington is not the real ending of this story. The real ending happened 6 years earlier, in a plaza in Cologne, and it did not involve a medal. Her name was Katharina Esser. She was 26 years old. On the afternoon of March 6, 1945, she was driving through the plaza in a small civilian car, trying to escape the fighting, when the Panther and Eagle 7 found each other. Her car was caught in the crossfire. She was killed. Nobody at the time knew whose round had done it. Clarence Smoyer had known, for the rest of his life, that one of his 3 rounds might have been the round that killed her. He had lived with that knowledge for 70 years. In 2013, at the age of 90, he travelled back to Cologne with Adam Makos. He met Katharina Esser's surviving relatives. He stood with them at the place where she had died. He said the words that a 21-year-old corporal in a tank turret in 1945 could never have said. He said he was sorry. 6 years later, he received the Bronze Star at the National World War II Memorial. He died 3 years after that, in December of 2022, at the age of 99. The last man from Eagle 7 is gone. The Pershing did not win the war. 20 tanks did not win the war. The war was already being won when the 20 tanks arrived, by American factories and Russian soldiers and British engineers, and by the sheer, inexorable weight of the world set against a regime that had chosen to fight the world. The Pershing was a latecomer. It was late by 15 months. It was late by many thousands of American lives. It was late by every measure that mattered to the men who had died waiting for it. But it did one thing that mattered. It proved, in the last 8 weeks of the last European war, that American industry and American engineering and American democracy could produce a weapon equal to anything a totalitarian state had built. It proved that the assumption of German technical superiority, which had sustained the Panzerwaffe through 3 years of retreat, was not permanent. It proved that a 56-year-old brigadier general in Washington could bend a bureaucracy hard enough, at the right moment, to save a division's worth of lives before the war ended. And in the end, 68 years later, it proved something smaller and more human, that an ordinary young man from a small Pennsylvania town could come home from the war, live a long and quiet life, and in his 90th year find the courage to face the family of a woman he had killed and say, without knowing whether it would be enough, that he was sorry. The Pershing was a tank. It was a good tank. It was not the tank that broke the German army. The German army had already broken. The Pershing simply arrived in time to see it.